I went to fix the fence, but the farmer said, "First thank me with a kiss." The first time I stepped onto that wide stretch of farmland, I thought I was just there to lend a hand. A broken fence, a few hours of work, maybe some polite small talk with the man who owned the place. I had no idea that one moment, one request spoken in a quiet but commanding voice, would change the way I saw myself, my desires, and my future. This is not just a story about fixing wood and wire, it's about fixing the lies we tell ourselves, the walls we build to keep certain truths out, and the way a single spark of honesty can set fire to everything we thought we knew. So if you've ever stood in front of a choice that could alter the direction of your life, if you've ever felt the pull of something forbidden, something that both terrifies and excites you, then stay with me until the end. Because what happened that day under the hot sun on an isolated farm will make you question how far you'd go for connection, and what kind of risks you're willing to take when your heart is on the line. And before we dive into this journey, make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens when boundaries are tested, secrets are uncovered, and two men find themselves standing face to face with a truth neither of them can ignore. The morning sun was already climbing high over the fields when I pulled my truck onto the gravel drive. The air smelled of dust and freshly cut hay, the kind of scent that clings to your clothes and stays with you long after you've left. I had agreed to help out with the fence because it felt like the right thing to do. Mr. Whitmore, the farmer everyone just called Caleb, had mentioned it last week at the supply store when I ran into him. His voice was low and unhurried, the kind that makes you listen even if he's only talking about nails and lumber. "I could use an extra pair of hands," he'd said, glancing at me with those eyes that never seemed to give away more than they wanted to. "Fences don't fix themselves." I laughed it off then, but I knew I'd be showing up. Maybe because I wanted to prove I was useful, maybe because the way his gaze lingered made me feel something I wasn't ready to name. The farm stretched wide and quiet when I arrived. A red barn stood against the horizon like something out of a postcard, weathered but proud. Cattle grazed lazily in the pasture, their occasional calls breaking the silence. The fence, as expected, was broken in a few places, posts leaning, wires slack, as if they had simply given up holding everything together. I grabbed my gloves, stepped out of the truck, and called toward the barn. "Caleb." He emerged from the shadowed doorway a moment later, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a faded denim shirt rolled up at the sleeves. His hair was dark, flecked with a hint of gray near the temples, and he carried himself with a quiet confidence that made me feel both nervous and curious. "You showed up," he said simply, wiping his hands on a rag. His lips curved just slightly, not a full smile, more like an acknowledgement. "Didn't want to leave you to fight with the fence alone," I answered. We started working side by side, pulling nails, setting posts, stretching wire. At first, the silence between us was filled only with the sound of hammers and the occasional grunt of effort. But slowly, the quiet gave way to small talk. The weather, the stubborn cattle, how unpredictable spring could be. His voice had a steady rhythm, low enough that I sometimes leaned in to catch every word. As the hours passed, I found myself studying him when he wasn't looking. The strength in his hands, the way his shirt clung to his back when he bent down, the calm focus etched in his brow. I kept telling myself I was only noticing because we were working closely, because there wasn't much else to distract me. But deep down I knew it was more. By midday, sweat clung to both of us. He took off his shirt, leaving only a plain white undershirt, and tossed the denim across a fence post. His forearms glistened in the sun, muscles flexing with each motion. "You holding up?" he asked, glancing at me as I wiped my forehead. "Yeah," I said quickly, though my chest felt tighter than it should from just hauling wood. He chuckled, a sound that was low and almost teasing. "City hands aren't used to this kind of work." "Maybe not," I admitted. "But I'm learning." It wasn't just the fence I was learning about, it was him, too. The way he looked at me sometimes, longer than necessary, as if measuring more than just the progress of our work. We stopped near the corner post as the afternoon light shifted. Caleb leaned against the wood, crossing his arms, his gaze steady on me. "You know," he said after a pause, "there's something about people who come here. Some stay on the surface, help out, and leave. Others," He let the thought hang, his eyes narrowing slightly. Others don't realize they're about to find more than they came for. I swallowed hard, unsure how to answer. His words felt heavier than casual conversation, charged with something unspoken. Maybe I'm just here to fix a fence, I tried, forcing a smile. Maybe, he replied, tilting his head. But maybe not. The silence between us deepened. I felt the weight of his presence, the heat of the sun, the tension crackling like the stretched wire we just secured. My chest rose and fell too quickly, and I wondered if he noticed. He pushed off the post and took a step closer. Close enough that I could see the flecks of green in his eyes, close enough that the smell of earth and sweat and something distinctly him filled the air around me. I should probably thank you, he said, his tone softer now, almost deliberate. Not everyone would give up their Saturday to help out a farmer. You don't have to, I answered, though my voice sounded thinner than I meant it to. Oh, I think I do, he continued, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. His gaze locked with mine, steady and unflinching. But I don't believe in just saying thank you. My heart pounded as I tried to process what he meant. Then he leaned in just slightly, his words quiet but unmistakable. First, thank me with a kiss. The world seemed to stop. The cattle, the sun, the quiet hum of the farm, all of it faded into the background. I froze, torn between the rush of desire and the fear of what that moment could mean. Would I lean in, crossing a line I wasn't sure I was ready to cross? Or would I pull back, pretending I hadn't heard him, and live with the weight of what might have been? I stood there, my lips parting, my heart racing, caught between the safety of silence and the danger of everything I secretly wanted. For a long moment, I couldn't move. The words hung between us, heavy and undeniable, like the last nail waiting to be hammered into the fence. First, thank me with a kiss. His voice replayed in my mind, each syllable vibrating through me. I wanted to laugh it off, pretend he was joking. But his eyes told me he wasn't. They were steady, fixed on me with an intensity that left no room for misinterpretation. My throat went dry, and when I finally spoke, my voice came out uneven. You can't just say something like that. Why not? Caleb asked, calm as ever, as if he'd simply asked me to pass a tool. Because, I started, then stopped, unsure how to finish. Because I wasn't sure what this was. Because I had spent years convincing myself that feelings like these were fleeting, dangerous, better left unexplored. Because I had no idea what it would mean if I admitted that part of me wanted exactly what he was offering. He stepped back half a pace, giving me space, though his gaze never wavered. I didn't mean to scare you. You didn't, I lied. My pulse was racing, my palms sweaty inside my gloves. Fear wasn't the right word for what I felt. It was anticipation, curiosity, something much harder to control. We stood there in silence for a while, the air thick with words unsaid. Finally, he broke it. You don't have to do anything, he said quietly. I'm not asking for more than you're willing to give. But the damage, or maybe the truth, was already done. His request had cracked something open inside me. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. We went back to work on the fence, neither of us mentioning what had happened. My hands moved automatically, hammering, pulling, holding, while my mind replayed that moment over and over. Every time our eyes met, even for the briefest second, the memory of his voice pulled me back to the edge of something I couldn't quite name. As the sun dipped lower, painting the fields in gold and amber, we finally finished the last post. Caleb wiped his hands on his jeans, then glanced at me. You did good today, he said, almost matter-of-fact. Thanks, I replied, though my voice sounded distant, distracted. He studied me for a beat longer, then nodded. I'll walk you to your truck. We didn't speak as we crossed the field. The gravel crunched beneath our boots, the only sound in the quiet evening air. When we reached the truck, I hesitated, gripping the door handle but not opening it. Part of me wanted to leave quickly, escape the tension. Another part wanted to stay, to risk whatever might come next. Caleb stood a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. You're thinking too hard, he said. I let out a small, nervous laugh. Maybe I am. You don't owe me anything, he continued. But I want you to know something. I looked at him, waiting. I don't play games, he said. His tone was firm, but there was a gentleness underneath. If I tell you something, it's because I mean it. When I asked you to thank me with a kiss, it wasn't a joke. It was me being honest about what I wanted. My chest tightened. Honesty. That was what unsettled me the most. He wasn't hiding behind small talk or excuses. He had laid it out bare, and now it was on me to decide what to do with it. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, the distant sound of tires on gravel interrupted us. Both of us turned to see a dusty SUV pulling onto the property. The vehicle came to a stop a few yards away, and a woman stepped out, middle-aged, with sharp eyes and a clipboard in her hand. "Evening, Caleb," she called, striding toward us. "Evening, Marlene," he replied, his voice carrying a different weight now, more guarded, more formal. She looked at me briefly, then back at him. "You know the county's been asking about this fence for months. If the cattle keep wandering into the road, there's going to be fines. I need to file my report." The tension between us shifted, replaced by something external, something urgent. Caleb squared his shoulders. "The fence is fixed. No cattle are getting out now." Marlene made a note on her clipboard, her eyes narrowing. "I'll have to inspect it myself." She moved past us, heading toward the pasture. Caleb muttered under his breath, then glanced at me. "She's been on my back for weeks. Doesn't trust me to handle my own land." I nodded, but inside I felt a pang of unease. This wasn't just about fences anymore. There was pressure, oversight, judgment from the outside. And if anyone saw what had almost happened between us, what then? By the time Marlene returned, she seemed satisfied enough to leave, though not without a final pointed glance at Caleb. "Make sure it stays that way," she said before climbing into her SUV and driving off. When the dust settled, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Caleb looked at me, his expression unreadable. "See what I mean?" he said finally. "There's always someone watching. Always someone ready to question what you're doing." I swallowed, the weight of his words sinking in. He wasn't just talking about fences anymore. He took a step closer, his voice lower now, almost challenging. "So you have to decide, do you live by what they expect, or by what you want?" My heart pounded as his eyes locked onto mine. The question wasn't hypothetical. It was for me. And standing there in the fading light, with the echoes of Marlene's SUV fading down the road, I realized I couldn't avoid the choice forever. I gripped the handle of my truck door again, my knuckles white, my chest tight. I had no answer for him. Not yet. But I knew that whatever I said next could change everything. That night, lying in bed, I replayed everything over and over. Caleb's words, his eyes, the silence that followed Marlene's arrival. It all blurred into a storm of questions I couldn't escape. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that he'd spoken in the heat of the moment, that I was imagining the weight behind his voice. But my body betrayed me. My pulse quickened every time I remembered how close he'd stood, how his gaze had pinned me to the spot like I was the only thing that mattered. Sleep came in fragments, broken by thoughts I couldn't quiet. And when dawn finally bled through my curtains, I was still restless. Part of me wanted to avoid him, to let yesterday sink into silence. But another part, louder, braver, hungrier, wanted to see him again, to know if that moment had been real. By mid-morning, I was back at the farm. I told myself I was just checking the fence, making sure Marlene hadn't been right, but deep down I knew it wasn't the fence I was worried about. Caleb was in the barn when I arrived, stacking bales of hay. His shirt clung to his shoulders, damp with sweat. He glanced up when he saw me, his expression unreadable at first, then softening into something I couldn't quite name. "Didn't expect to see you today," he said, his tone low and even. "Just thought I'd check the posts again," I lied, running a hand over the back of my neck. He smirked, not calling me out, but I could tell he didn't believe me. "Fence is fine. Stronger than it's been in years." I nodded, shifting on my feet. "Still, doesn't hurt to look." For a moment, neither of us moved. The air inside the barn was heavy, filled with the scent of hay, earth, and something else, something that made my chest tighten. Finally, he set down the bale he was holding and walked toward me, slow, deliberate steps on the wooden floor. "You didn't answer me yesterday," he said quietly, stopping just a few feet away. I swallowed hard. I didn't know how. And now? My heart raced. I wanted to tell him I was terrified, that I didn't know if I was ready to cross a line I couldn't uncross. But instead, the words that came out were softer, more honest than I meant them to be. Now I can't stop thinking about it. Something flickered in his eyes. Satisfaction, relief, maybe both. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off his skin. "You think too much," he murmured. "Sometimes you just have to feel." Before I could respond, his hand lifted, brushing against mine. It wasn't a grab, not a claim, just the faintest touch, his fingers grazing over my knuckles. But the effect was immediate, electric. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze, every nerve alive with the sensation. "Caleb," I whispered, though my voice cracked on his name. His hand lingered, fingers pressing lightly, testing the space between us. "You want to tell me to stop?" he asked, his voice low, steady, daring. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My silence was its own kind of confession. For a moment, the world shrank to nothing but that touch. The barn, the farm, the rest of my life, all of it faded. It was just his hand on mine, the slow spread of warmth, the terrifying thrill of wanting more. But before anything else could happen, the sound of a sharp bark echoed outside. We both startled, breaking apart as a border collie darted past the open barn doors, followed by the shouts of a man I didn't recognize. "Caleb, you out here?" the man called, breathless. Caleb straightened, his jaw tightening. "Yeah," he answered, stepping toward the door. A ranch hand, young, dust-covered, anxious, appeared, panting. Fence on the south side. Cattle got out. Couple already headed toward the road. Caleb swore under his breath, grabbing his hat from a hook. He glanced at me, his eyes flashing with a mix of urgency and something else. "Come on," he said. "I'll need your help." Without thinking, I followed him out of the barn. We ran across the pasture, the collie weaving between us, barking commands at the cattle as if it knew the stakes. Dust kicked up around our boots, the sun bearing down hard as we reached the broken stretch of fence. It was chaos, cattle milling dangerously close to the road, horns glinting in the light, the sound of hooves pounding against the ground. Caleb didn't hesitate. He shouted orders to the ranch hand, waved at the dog, and moved straight into the mess like he'd done it 100 times before. I froze for a second watching him. The confidence in his movements, the way he took control, it was magnetic. But this wasn't about attraction anymore. This was dangerous. If those cattle reached the road, if a car came speeding by, someone could get hurt, or worse. "Move!" Caleb yelled at me, snapping me back to the moment. I scrambled to grab a length of rope, doing my best to follow his lead. We herded, blocked, pushed the cattle back toward safety. My muscles burned, my chest heaved, but adrenaline kept me moving. Finally, with a coordinated effort, the last of the cattle stumbled back inside the pasture. Caleb slammed the gate shut, securing it with a heavy chain. The dust settled, leaving us all gasping for breath. The ranch hand muttered something about checking the rest of the fence and hurried off, leaving just Caleb and me by the gate. He pulled his hat off, ran a hand through his damp hair, and turned to me. "You okay?" he asked, his voice rough but steady. "Yeah," I managed, though my body was trembling. His eyes lingered on me, softer now, almost vulnerable. He stepped closer again, close enough that I could see the sweat running down his temple. "You stayed," he said, almost like he was surprised. "Of course I stayed," I replied. "You needed me." For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, deliberately, he lifted his hand again, this time brushing the dust from my cheek, his thumb grazing the edge of my jaw. The touch was gentle, but it carried the same charge as before, stronger now after everything we'd just faced. My breath caught, my chest tightening. And then, before I could stop myself, I leaned in, just slightly, just enough to close half the distance. His lips parted, his eyes searching mine. The moment stretched, fragile, electric. and that was when a car engine roared in the distance. Headlights appeared on the road, too close, too fast. One of the cattle had broken away after all, stepping straight into the path of the oncoming vehicle. Caleb jerked back, swearing loudly as he sprinted toward the road. I stood frozen, heart hammering, the taste of almost still burning in my mouth. The sound of screeching brakes tore through the air. Gravel flew as the pickup truck skidded, tires fighting for grip, while the lone steer froze in the middle of the road. My body reacted before my mind did. I ran, legs burning, heart pounding like it might burst through my chest. Caleb was already ahead of me, sprinting toward the danger with a speed that didn't match his size. He waved his arms, shouting to scare the animal off the asphalt. The steer jolted, hooves clattering, stumbling just enough for the truck to veer around. Metal shrieked as rubber smoked, but somehow, miraculously, no impact came. The driver cursed out the window, throwing an angry gesture before accelerating away, leaving behind only the acrid smell of burnt tires and fear. Caleb doubled over, hands on his knees, catching his breath. I reached him seconds later, chest heaving, sweat dripping into my eyes. For a moment, all I could do was stand there, the adrenaline buzzing through me like electricity. That was close, I managed, my voice hoarse. Too close, he replied, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on the steer as it finally trotted back toward the pasture. If that had gone wrong, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. We stood side by side in silence, the weight of what almost happened pressing down on us. Then he turned to me, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw fear in his expression. Not the kind you hide behind a smirk or bury under stubbornness, real fear. "You could have been out here alone," he said, his voice low, almost cracking. "And if you had been..." I shook my head quickly. But I wasn't. I stayed. His eyes softened, lingering on me, and something in his posture shifted. He reached out, gripping my arm, his hand firm and warm even through the fabric of my sleeve. The contact steadied me, tethered me to him in a way I didn't expect. "You don't even know what you're doing here, do you?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper now, though there was no one else around to hear. I hesitated. He was right. I hadn't planned on this. I told myself I was here to help, to fix a fence, to do something useful. But from the moment he'd looked at me with those steady, unflinching eyes, I'd been caught in something much bigger than I was ready for. I admitted, my chest tightening with the words. "I don't know what I'm doing. But I know I don't want to walk away." Caleb let out a slow breath, his grip on my arm tightening briefly before he released me. His gaze lingered, heavy with everything neither of us had the courage to say outright. Then he looked back at the road, shaking his head. "We can't stand out here all day," he muttered, his tone shifting, pulling the moment back under control. "Help me get that steer back in." Together, we guided the animal into the pasture, closing the gate firmly behind it. Dust clung to my skin and my muscles ached, but underneath the exhaustion was a different kind of tension, one that hummed between us like a live wire. Back at the barn, Caleb leaned against the doorframe, watching me as I wiped sweat from my face with the hem of my shirt. His eyes followed the motion, lingering a little too long, and I felt my pulse quicken. "You're tougher than I thought," he said finally. I laughed softly. "Guess I'm full of surprises." His lips curved just slightly, not quite a smile but close. "That you are." Silence stretched again, thick and charged. I wanted to step closer, to bridge the space between us, but my legs wouldn't move. Instead, I stood frozen, caught between wanting and fear. Then Caleb broke it. He pushed off the frame, closing the distance until he was only a foot away. The smell of sweat and earth clung to him, sharp and grounding. "You know what almost happened out there?" he asked, his voice quiet but insistent. "I know," I replied, though I wasn't sure if he meant the steer, the truck, or the moment we'd nearly kissed. He shook his head. "Life doesn't wait. It doesn't ask if you're ready. One second you think you've got time, the next it's gone. That truck could have killed us both." The weight of his words sank deep, pressing against all the fears I'd tried to bury. He was right. Waiting, pretending, hiding. It wouldn't keep me safe. It would only leave me with regrets. Before I could respond, he reached up and touched my jaw again, like he had yesterday, only firmer this time. My breath caught, my heart hammering against my ribs. His thumb brushed my cheek, rough and gentle all at once. "You're still thinking too much," he whispered. And then, for the briefest moment, his lips brushed mine. Soft, fleeting, more question than statement, but real. The world tilted, every nerve in my body igniting. I gasped, pulling back just slightly, my chest heaving. "Caleb." But whatever I was about to say died in my throat as the sound of a truck engine roared into the yard again. Tires crunched over gravel, and I turned to see Marlene's SUV pulling up fast, dust trailing behind it. She stepped out, clipboard in hand, her expression sharp as a blade. "Caleb Whitmore," she barked, striding toward us. "I just got a call about that steer on the road. You're one incident away from losing your license to graze near the highway." My stomach dropped. The kiss, our moment, wasn't just ours anymore. If she'd seen, if she suspected, everything could unravel. Caleb straightened, his face hardening into the guarded mask I'd seen before. "The fence is secure," he said firmly. "We handled it." But Marlene's eyes flicked between us, sharp, assessing. And in that moment, I realized the danger wasn't just out on the road. It was right here, standing between the truth we'd just touched and the world that might never accept it. The dust hadn't even settled from Marlene's SUV before the weight of reality came crashing down. She had stormed through the yard with her clipboard, checking the locks on the gates, rattling off warnings about liability and fines. I stood frozen at Caleb's side, my pulse still racing from the briefest touch of his lips minutes earlier. She didn't see it. Or if she did, she gave no sign. But the fear lingered in me, the fear of being exposed, of what it would mean if anyone outside this farm knew what had just happened. When Marlene finally left, Caleb didn't speak right away. He just watched the road, his jaw tight, hands curled into fists at his sides. I waited, the silence stretching until it felt unbearable. "You should go," he said finally, his voice low and rough. The words cut deeper than I expected. "That's it." He turned to me, his eyes burning with something fierce and conflicted. "You don't understand. Around here, people see everything. They talk. They judge. And I can't." His voice broke off, but the weight of what he didn't say was heavy enough. I took a step closer, ignoring the fear rising in my chest. "So what? We pretend nothing happened? Pretend I don't feel what I feel every time you look at me?" His gaze met mine, and in it I saw the same war I felt inside, desire clashing with doubt, longing strangled by fear. "Do you?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Do you really feel it?" "Yes." The word left my lips before I could stop it. Honest, raw, undeniable. I don't know what it means, I don't know what comes next, but I know it's real. And so do you. For a moment, the barn, the fields, the whole world seemed to fall away. It was just him and me, two men standing on a line neither of us had dared cross before. Slowly, Caleb exhaled. He stepped forward, closing the distance between us. His hand rose again, rough fingers cupping my jaw with a tenderness that unraveled me. This time, there was no hesitation, no fleeting brush of lips. He kissed me fully, deeply, with the kind of certainty that comes only when the risk no longer matters. The kiss was both a question and an answer. It burned, it healed, it told me everything words couldn't. And when we finally pulled apart, our foreheads rested together, breaths mingling in the quiet. "I've been alone on this farm for a long time," he admitted softly. "Long enough to think that maybe I was supposed to stay that way. But then you showed up. And now," he shook his head, almost laughing, "now I don't know how to go back." I smiled faintly, my heart pounding in a rhythm that felt new and alive. "Maybe you don't have to." We stood there until the sun dipped low, painting the fields in amber and crimson. The broken fence was behind us, stronger now, rebuilt. Maybe it was a metaphor, or maybe I was just desperate to see one. Either way, I felt like something inside me had been repaired too. Later, when I climbed into my truck, Caleb lingered by the door. His eyes softened as he said, "Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," I agreed. And for the first time in a long while, the word didn't feel uncertain. It felt like a promise. As I drove away, the image of him standing there burned in my mind, solid, steady, waiting. And though the road ahead was unknown, I realized I wasn't afraid of it anymore. Because sometimes, life doesn't give you guarantees. It doesn't wait until you're ready. It throws you into moments that terrify you, force you to choose, to admit what you want, even if the world outside might not understand. And maybe that's the only way to really live, not by what's safe or expected, but by what sets your heart on fire. If you've ever found yourself standing on the edge of a choice, hesitating, questioning, afraid of what others might think, this story is for you. Ask yourself, what risks are worth taking? What truths are you willing to live for, no matter the cost? If Caleb and I learned anything, it's that silence builds fences higher than any wood and wire. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is tear them down. So, I leave you with this. What fence in your own life needs fixing, and what will you find waiting on the other side once you finally cross it? If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. There are more stories to tell, more truths to uncover, and more moments that remind us all why love, no matter how it begins, is always worth the risk.